Hello and welcome to the Barrcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr. We're going to do something a little unusual for the Barrcast and go topical. A few weeks ago, Marc Andreessen wrote a provocatively titled essay, Why AI Will Save the World. I have it up here. It's worth a read if you haven't checked it out already. But we're going to take the bait and get provoked by it, but we're going to engage with a really small subset of the essay. But it's the subset that really struck me the most. And it's about compassion. So Marc's, at a super high level, I think Marc's point is intelligence is good. And there's a long track record of intelligence being valuable for humans on the microcosmic and macrocosmic scales. Artificial intelligence has the potential to greatly augment human intelligence and therefore ought to, unless we really screw it up, save the world or at least greatly improve the world. And he has a lot to say about that. But as he offers examples here, the first two examples, let's just listen to them. In our new era of AI, every child will have an AI tutor that is infinitely patient, infinitely compassionate, infinitely knowledgeable, infinitely helpful. The AI tutor will be by each child's side every step of their development, helping them maximize their potential with the machine version of infinite love. Every person will have an AI assistant / coach / mentor / trainer / advisor / therapist that is infinitely patient, infinitely compassionate, infinitely knowledgeable, and infinitely helpful. The AI assistant will be present through all of life's opportunities and challenges, maximizing every person's outcomes. So these are pretty bold claims, and I think I know what Marc means by them. AI systems can be trained to act like good, caring listeners. They can reflect back what you're saying. They can express concern for your predicament. They never have anywhere else they need to go. They don't get drained by your suffering. And so from what I know about Marc and having listened to other conversations, I don't think he's making the strong claim that artificial compassion is the same as human compassion. But I think he's saying a system that can provide that kind of resource to people is going to be really valuable. And so what I want to do in this video is just push on that a little bit and explore what is artificial compassion, how is it different from human compassion, what is compassion itself, and how might we measure it given the likelihood of rapid progress, or at least rapid development in exactly the fields that Marc is talking about, tutoring, teaching, coaching, mentoring, advising, therapy, etc. So to ground ourselves in the problem a little bit, I just want to bring up a Twitter thread from several months ago from Rob Morris, who's the co-founder and CEO of Koko, which is a mental health startup and nonprofit. And Rob does great work. I know him a little bit and has a researcher background. And so he ran an experiment using GPT-3, which was the newest model at the time, and offered a co-pilot experience. So rather than needing to write supportive messages from scratch, humans could approve and tweak, if necessary, AI-generated support messages. And so what happened was really encouraging, as Rob says. Those messages, AI-assisted messages, were rated much higher than human-only messages. And on top of that, they were delivered much faster. So sort of have this holy shit moment, kind of like Marc predicts, right? Wait, we can send higher quality messages at a faster rate. The problem is that once users became aware that the messages had been written, at least in part, by AI, all those effects disappeared. And this is pretty intuitive. You can probably imagine the same thing happening yourself. Someone is saying, I'm here for you. That sounds really hard. Tell me more. And you say, wait, are you a bot? And they say, actually, I am a bot, but I still really want to hear about this. You can maybe even contact the feeling of the rug being pulled out underneath you. So I think that's a good starting place. Marc, in his essay, points to other studies showing that, for instance, patients are reporting much greater satisfaction with doctor messages when those doctor messages are assisted by AI. They find them more empathetic, etc. And again, I would predict that that's sort of a provisional approval rating. Once the person says, hey, doc, thanks for the support, but would you be open to jumping on a call? And the doc either says, I actually can't do that, or the AI system says, honestly, I'm just an AI system. All of those good feels will disappear. We know this because we experience it right now with tech support. If your DoorDash delivery is running late, someone is writing you a heartfelt apology. Gosh, that sounds really tough. I'm sorry. And it doesn't hold water with us anymore because two things. One is we know that all of this is scripted. And two is we know from experience that it's impossible to actually speak with a human these days. So I think that's sort of the starting place of the conversation around artificial compassion. And just note how different it is from artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, if it turns out, oh wait, a bot wrote this, you just or maybe need to be a little bit more skeptical. Hey, can you give me the source for that? Right? You dial up your skepticism or your rigor when it turns out that you're speaking with an AI system and not, let's say, a professor of the field that you're interested in. But you don't get that rug pulled under you feeling. That seems to be specific to artificial compassion. So I want to go deeper on what is that and what are the mechanics of compassion in general. And so to do that, we're going to turn to Buddhism, specifically Mahayana Buddhism, which places a particular emphasis on compassion. In Mahayana, compassion and wisdom serve as sort of the two pillars of awakening, of the Bodhisattva vow, of the Bodhisattva path. And what is compassion exactly? One way you could define it, and I think I've heard it defined, is openness to suffering. There's pain, there's suffering. It could be your own, it could be somebody else's. It starts to not even matter. In fact, the distinction of whose suffering it is starts to feel immaterial. It's just that there's suffering and we move toward that suffering and we're there. We're open to it. And in that openness, some wonderful things can happen. There can be grief, there can be healing, there can be transformation. But I like to think of compassion as just being open to the suffering without requiring anything to happen. Once we start wishing the suffering away, we risk moving into a different mode of solving or fixing or transacting. So to me, the simplest definition and the starting place is openness to suffering. And because suffering is a prerequisite for compassion, we humans have a very special relationship with it because there's so much suffering in our world. In the Buddhist cosmos, there are all of these realms where there are like eternal gods who live in enlightened societies, perfect social justice, a perfect economic system or no economic system, care for natural resources, and enlightenment is the natural state of people in those realms. They don't know suffering, and so because they don't know suffering, they don't know that particular door to awakening. I'm not sure if this is what Thich Nhat Hanh means when he describes the mud and the lotus. The lotus grows from the mud, but it's certainly an example. Compassion grows from suffering. And I want to dig up a passage from the Vimalakirti Sutra that describes this in some detail. So this is the Vimalakirti, and we're just dropping right into the middle of it. But for a little bit of context, these wonderful beings have heard of this guy, Vimalakirti, who lives in the Saha realm, that's earth. He's a householder, he's not a monk, he's married. And he's said to be really just one of the greatest spreaders of the Dharma there is. And so they ask the Buddha, can we go to the Saha realm and meet him and learn about how he teaches the Dharma? So they sort of have a gathering, and first Vimalakirti wants to know, noble sirs, how does the Tathagata, that's the Buddha, teach his Dharma on your planet? They say, the Tathagata does not teach the Dharma by means of sound and language. He disciplines the bodhisattvas only by means of perfumes. At the foot of each perfume tree sits a bodhisattva, and the trees emit perfumes like this one. From the moment they smell that perfume, the bodhisattvas attain the concentration called source of all bodhisattva virtues. From the moment they attain that concentration, all the bodhisattva virtues are produced in them. So just imagine this heavenly realm where the teaching is done completely through smells, and emitted by trees. And then they ask, well, how does the Buddha Shakyamuni, that's the Buddha in the Saha realm, how does he teach the Dharma? Vimalakirti replied, good sirs, these living beings here are hard to discipline. Therefore, he teaches them with discourses appropriate for the disciplining of the wild and uncivilized. How does he discipline the wild and the uncivilized? What discourses are appropriate? Here they are. This is hell. This is the animal world. This is the world of the Lord of Death. These are the adversities. These are the rebirths with crippled faculties. These are physical misdeeds, and on and on and on. This is lying. This is backbiting. This is harsh speech. This is sloth. This is the fruit of sloth. This is false wisdom. This is the fruit of false wisdom. On and on and on. Thus, by means of these varied explanations of the Dharma, the Buddha trains the minds of those living beings who are just like wild horses. Just as wild horses or wild elephants will not be tamed unless the goad pierces them to the marrow, so living beings who are wild and hard to civilize are disciplined only by means of discourses about all kinds of miseries. The Bodhisattva said, thus is established the greatness of the Buddha Shakyamuni. It is marvelous how, concealing his miraculous power, he civilizes the wild living beings who are poor and inferior, and the bodhisattvas who settle in a Buddha field of such intense hardships must have inconceivably great compassion. So a lot of great stuff in there, but I think just the key takeaways are first that to really fully experience compassion in all of its forms requires a world where there's a lot of suffering. And the beings that visit Vimalakirti have a newfound appreciation after learning about all of these teachings that they never heard about because they simply weren't necessary. In our planet, we just smell the perfume and we get it. So there's that link between compassion and suffering. And furthermore, there's this mention of the Buddha field, which maybe feels a little bit mystical, but it doesn't have to. When I think about the field, I think about that's what's opened up. When someone is open to suffering, they open up a field. And that field isn't inside me or inside you, it's somewhere else. And we don't need to be mystics to believe that. We've experienced it for ourselves in moments of deep connection with a loved one. And as a parent, I experience it on the regular. And so if you are a parent or an uncle or an aunt, you've probably been with a young person when they're having big feelings, a tantrum, they're crying, and there are a lot of ways to conceive of that. But for me, the most intuitive is that they're suffering and they don't have any place to put their suffering. Their inner world is not yet doesn't have the capacity to hold that suffering. And so as parents or as caregivers, we can open that field. We can hold their suffering for them. We can be open to it. And that simultaneously transforms their suffering, but more importantly, it plants a seed within that young person. And there's lots of cognitive development theories that back this up in other language. I think Bion is Wilfred Bion is one who talks about alpha elements and beta elements. And there are probably more up-to-date ways to talk about this that don't sound as mystical as a Buddha field, but we take the raw suffering and we create a field, and in that field, that suffering is transformed. This is happening all the time in life. So this has just been a brief excursion into compassion and the idea of artificial compassion. And we'll just close with a few preliminary takeaways. So we're defining compassion as an openness to suffering, a particular kind of openness that makes transformation of that suffering possible. We are taking away that compassion requires suffering to bloom. Beings like the beings in the Vimalakirti who grow up in paradises where the Dharma is taught through perfume have less access to compassion than those who experience the hardships of the Saha world. The lotus grows in the mud. And compassion can't be taught in a book. It can't be instructed. Compassion can only be learned when we receive it. So as parents or as caregivers, we are compassionate to little ones, and that compassion plants a seed in those young beings that allows future self-compassion to bloom. So with those preliminary understandings established, what does this mean for the prospects of artificial compassion? Well, like we've seen with Koko, I think we need to be really cautious about this brittle quality of artificial compassion, that feeling of the rug being pulled out underneath us. Now equipped with this framing, we are hallucinating a field that isn't really there. I'm remembering when I was really sick as a young kid, my mom took me out for a milkshake. I couldn't eat any solid food. I could only sip through a straw. And so we went to Carvel, and it made me feel a lot better. But it was the taking me out to Carvel that was where the compassion resided. It wasn't in the calories or even in the flavor of the milkshake. And so if it had have turned out that a bot had have been driving me to Carvel, I would have lost the compassion. The compassion didn't reside in the milkshake. It resided in the field. It resided in the trip of the car. It resided in my mom's love. So there's a brittle quality to artificial compassion that is different than artificial intelligence. That has its own brittle quality, but it's missing that rug getting pulled out from underneath you piece. There's a potential deception in artificial compassion that we need to be really careful about. That said, I also think that there's something to be really excited about with artificial compassion. For those of us who have experienced enough compassion that we can generate our own healing fields, I think AI co-pilots could potentially be very, very helpful, and I've already experienced some value there. That is to say, not a co-pilot generating the field on your behalf, but reminding you that you have the capacity to do it, that you can be your own healer, I think shows a lot of promise. But that is applying to a certain level of maturity that not many people will have. And I think Marc is being too optimistic when he thinks that kids can have those seeds of compassion planted in them by artificial systems. I don't agree with that, and I think that'll backfire. Fortunately, I do think that there are some pretty clear ways that we can measure any intervention of compassion. And I would say that this would come down not to did this intervention make you feel better? That's like, did the milkshake make you feel better? Sure, maybe, but how many milkshakes will it take? Will I get immune to milkshakes? And will there be any kind of feeling of betrayal later? Those are all valid concerns. So if I were trying to measure the success or measure the validity of compassion interventions, I would be looking for transfer. That is to say, after I received this act of compassion, whether from a human or an artificial system, was I able to eventually open a field for others? Right? Did I get to experience that openness opened by an elder? And did I know it so that when my little sister or somebody else or a friend at school has difficulty, can I open a field for them? And if artificial systems can do that, that would teach us a lot about the heart and about compassion and about these systems themselves. So I would love to see more work done in this space and more attention paid to what compassion is and how we might spread it. Okay, that's it for this Barrcast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.